It's a long story. I'll try to be as brief as I can. But in this story is illustrated the text that we just read. This is a story of a gentleman by the name John Douglas. It was in 1957 when John Douglas was conducting an evangelistic meeting in India. He was a preacher in USA. He had preached in several states in USA, West Virginia, Kansas, Tennessee, with a lot of results. And this time he went to India at an invitation of a friend to minister to the people of India. And one evening, as he was almost going to the end of his evangelistic crusade, John Douglas presented a message to the audience that was sitting in front of him. And after preaching that message, he made an appeal for people who had listened to that message and felt that God was speaking to them in a special way and they wanted to give themselves to Christ. And he stood there waiting for people to come. But nobody stood. And for a moment, John Douglas began to sweat. He had been preaching for all these days and he was coming to an end of his services, and he expected people to respond to the message of Christ. But nobody stood. And for a moment, he felt very lonely, standing there under the sweltering heat, and nobody stood up to respond to the message that he had been preaching. He started complaining in his heart, God, is this why you brought me here? To speak to people who have no need of the message that I've just been speaking. But while he was thinking, he noticed something in the audience. At the back of the tent he was preaching, one person stood up. And this was a very important thing to him. He looked at that person, and for a moment, he just wanted to run and hug that person who was coming to stand in front, giving himself to Christ. But as he was looking at that person, something caught his attention. Behind this man, there were young kids, 7 kids were coming behind him. And the man walked, coming to the front. And he stood there looking at this man. And when this man finally got to the front where Douglas was standing, Douglas noticed the children that were following this man. They were dressed in more than rags. The oldest of the 7 children was about 10 years old. And the youngest was just a toddler. The children were obviously confused, frightened, and hungry. They looked more dead than alive. And they clung to each other as if shell-shocked. As they drew closer to Douglas, the minister was so caught up in the children's horrible condition that he almost did not hear the man who was in front of these children posing a question to him. Do you believe what you said tonight? Was the question the man asked. Looking into the man's eyes, Douglas nodded. I believe every word. Then the man continued. Do you live the words you speak? I do my best to follow Christ's teaching, said Douglas. I am a Hindu, the man said. I have listened to you tonight, and I brought these 7 children with me to listen to you. Your words are beautiful. The message you speak is powerful. But now I want to see if you actually feel strongly enough about what you said to live your words. Douglas looked at the man and looked back to the children. For a moment, these 8 people were the only thing he was looking at in his entire world. These children have no one to take care of them. They have no clothes, no food, no home, and certainly no money, said the gentleman. Tonight you said that we need to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and care for those who have nothing. Here are 7 who are. How did you say it? The least of these. Will you take care of them? Will you leave the words you asked us to leave? Their parents died for what they believed. Will you live for what you say you believe? Douglas looked at the man, pushed back his dark-rimmed glasses up on his nose. He took a long look at the frightened children who stood before him. How could he take care of them? He was about to leave for his home in a few days. His tour of India was over. He couldn't take them to America. There was simply no logical way that he could do anything for them. Yet what would happen if he left them here? What would happen if he just walked away? They would surely die. How could he live with himself if he did not meet the Hindu man's challenge by leaving his own message? What do you expect me to do? Douglas asked. Feed, clothe, and care for them, was a direct reply the Hindu man gave. Douglas had come to India to preach, not to be a nanny. Yet, as if he were looking into the very face of God, he nodded and said, I will do. The Indian man said something to the children and walked off. In unison, the 7 little children stared at Douglas, completely unsure of their fate. Stepping toward them, he reached out his arms and embraced each one. Even as he spoke comforting words to these children, he wondered how he was going to care for children who did not understand a single thing he said. What he did know was that these children were the reason he had been called to India. That first night, the 7 children stayed with Douglas in his hotel room. The next day, he went out into the city with the 7 children following along like little ducklings to find a home he could rent. Securing a modest house, he paid for a few months and moved in with his new family. The evangelist then sought the help of a local Christian congregation and found a woman who was compassionate enough and needed work. And he employed her as a governess for these 7 children. He set up on a bank account to provide for clothing, food, and school supplies for the children. And he stayed in India long enough to make sure that things were running well. When he was convinced that the children were in good hands, Douglas started on his trip back to the United States. But not before vowing to the little children that he would soon return to them. To cut a long story short, Douglas went back to the United States and appealed to his friends and family about what he had seen in India, not only the 7 children, but the many other children who were in the same situation. And slowly he talked to his friends and managed to get people commit a few dollars every month for the support of these children. And once he was sure that these children could be taken care of, his attention went to the other children he had seen in India who were suffering like these 7 children. And Douglas decided to do something about that. And in 1957, with just a handful of people backing him, Douglas started the World Missionary Evangelism. It's a very big charity organization running in the world today. And it started because of the 7 children that Douglas saw. It's a long story, but because of time I cannot go into the other details of the story. But the point I'd like to bring to us this morning is that here was a man who stood preaching the message of Christ and expecting people to come to Christ. But for a moment, his sermon did not have an impact on the people. But when that challenge came to him, are you willing to live the message that you're preaching to people? And he took a stand to live that message, to turn the theory of the gospel into actual practice, to live the message that he expected people to live in the sermons he preached. When Douglas started the World Missionary Association, he returned to India, looked for a place, and built the Douglas Memorial Children's Home. And that was the beginning of what would become a worldwide missionary institution. Over the years, towards the end of his life in 1988, Douglas had opened over 100 homes in India, caring for thousands of children. And he had extended his work to South Korea, extended to Philippines, extended to Kenya, and many other countries. In 1988, sitting in his office in Dallas, USA, he opened the text that we just read, Matthew chapter 25, verse 40 to 45. This was the message that he was preaching in India on that evening, when the Hindu man challenged him if he was willing to leave what that text was saying. The text says, "And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of these least of my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and ye gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me not in. Naked, and ye clothed me not. Sick and in prison, and ye visited me not. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? Then he shall answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it to one of these of the least of these, ye did it not to me." My brothers and sisters, our challenge this morning is not how much we know. Our challenge is not how much of the Bible we know. Our challenge is, can we live what we believe? Can we turn the theory of the gospel into a living testimony in the communities where we live, with the people that we interact with? Can they see Christianity in action in our very lives? It took Douglas to go to India. It took the Hindu man to ask him that question and say, are you ready to live what you just preached? Practically. If your answer is yes, right here, these are 7 kids. He had no plans for them, but that was his call. And so Douglas heeded that call to leave that message. And in 1988, sitting in his office, he left the office that day after reading this text to one of his workers, went home, had his dinner, and soon after dinner, crushed his heart. And he said these words, "Not yet, the work." A second later, Douglas was dead. At over 80 years old, he never slowed down. He traversed the globe, living his message. We will live what we believe. It's a challenge I have to you. Amen.